Hey guys, and welcome to a new review. And it's a romance review by me. I'm going to be talking about One Last Stop by Casey McQuiston. I'm sure by now you've noticed that Gretchen is the big romance reader on this channel. I don't normally read romance, but I picked up this one because it's Pride Month and I do read queer books. If you didn't know, Casey McQuiston is the author of Red, White, and Royal Blue, which was huge last year. This one is a female-female romance with a bi protagonist and a lesbian love interest, with a twist. The general plot to this one is that one of the characters is stuck in a weird time loop on a subway. She's from the 1970s, but she has been stuck riding the Q train in New York, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, all the way up until 2020, when our protagonist happens to stumble across her, and their interest in each other begins to get Jane to realize that she is stuck in time, or rather getting her unstuck from time, and while trying to help Jane and get her back to her own time, the two spark up a romance and a relationship, and it's fluffy and nice, and that's, you know, the general gist of it. It's a romance book, what you would expect of it. So it has things that I like, queer, LGBTQIA themes, and also magical realism stuff, because time loops don't happen in real life, but there seem to be at least accepted in this one. Overall, I rated this 4.5 stars. It took me a little while to get into the book, and I might chalk that up to me just not reading a whole lot of romance, and especially not contemporary romance. When I did read romance a lot, I was reading more urban fantasy romances. I wasn't reading contemporary romances, and even when I was reading a good chunk of YA contemporary romances, which this is not, this is an adult romance, but even when I was reading, you know, contemporary romances, they weren't my favorite. So me taking a little while to get into this book could just be a me problem. Other people might not have that problem. Take that with a grain of salt. But I will say there were a couple of times in here when characters would be talking and then Jane would say something, and I was like, oh, okay, this scene is taking place on the subway, because there's no way that Jane isn't on the subway, so, oh, I just didn't realize it, and there had been a couple of pages and she hadn't said anything, and I didn't know she was there. So there's a couple of little writing things where I was like, oh, I didn't realize that's what was happening here, and that's not major issues. It pulled me out of the story a little bit, but again, most of the rest of the book was great. So, like, this could have been a 5-star book. It was just a bunch of, like, little itty-bitty things that hit me and pulled me out of the reading experience that bumped it down to 4.5. That being said, based on everything else that I've read this year so far, I have a feeling this is going to be one of my top 10 books of the year, even though it didn't quite hit that 5 mark. If you wanted to, like, if you asked me, like, what I felt about this book, I would say it's fantastic. Pick it up. Already, it just came out. I've hand-sold it to a couple of people in my bookstore because I liked it that much, and because it's Pride Month and people are looking for some queer reads. Highly recommend this one. So yes, if you're like, oh no, it's not a full 5-star read, you can treat it like it's a full 5-star read. It's just like little nitpicky things that hit me that made me really bump it down. If you're wondering, there is more queer representation in here than just the two love interests here. August, the protagonist, lives in an apartment with a gay man and a trans man, and across the hall from them in their building is a drag queen, and all of these characters are important and show up throughout the book, and their discussions and affirmations and their own journeys are also important. Because of the aspect of Jane being from 1976, 77-ish time frame, we get to see discussions of what it was like to be queer back in the day versus what it is like to be queer now, and how there is still a lot to be done for the queer community. There's still a lot of fighting and there's still a lot of prejudice, but it's definitely come a long way since then. There's discussions of how AIDS was just starting to show up back then, but they didn't have a name yet, and how that sort of panned out. And there's also a lot of discussions around music. This was something something that I super enjoyed. It was a fast read. I was able to read it, which is something I've been struggling with this entire month. I have been having a hard time finishing books, and I was able to like finish this in 1 or 2 sittings. It wasn't hard at all. Obviously, romance is fluffy and easier to digest than some of the stuff that I was picking up, but that doesn't mean that it's bad. I liked it. Obviously, I'm gushing about it here. I have a feeling that this one's going to be just as popular as Red, White, and Royal Blue if it isn't already. If you get a chance, I recommend going out and picking it up, especially because it's a paperback book. It's not a hardcover, which honestly it probably could have been a hardcover. Like, people probably would have bought a hardcover of this. It's great. Highly recommended. I'm going to try and do a couple other videos this month where I talk about queer reads, not just this one, not just reviews, but also like maybe some recommendations, because it is something that is near and dear to my heart, and also because, you know, it's Pride Month, so it's time to talk about that stuff. I'm going to wish a happy Pride to all of my friends who fall under the queer umbrella in one way or another. I myself identify as non-binary, and I am also demisexual, which is on the asexual spectrum. I'm hopefully going to talk about some of that stuff this month. I also really quickly wanted to bring attention to a cause, a human rights cause. If you haven't seen, there was a news article that came out about a residential school in Canada where they have found more than 200 bodies of Indigenous children who were forced to go to that school and then died in that school's care. And a lot of folks have been saying that we need to be checking all of the residential schools, not just in Canada. That was something that happened here in America as well. Finding these lost children. I have links in the description for causes like MMIW, and also like where you can go to help support causes of searching for some of these children who their families were probably told that they ran away, and were never fully given closure for what happened to their children. And it's also important to educate yourself on the history of how we created cultural genocide here in the New World. White people came and they obviously tried to erase Indigenous culture, and one of the ways they did that was by stealing children and forcing them to go to like Catholic school, basically, but worse than that, because obviously children died there. So like my mom went to Catholic school, and she often talks about the horrors that she experienced there, and I'm sure it wasn't 1/10 of the horrors that anybody who attended residential school experienced. And also that's not like past, it's not history that's extremely far in the past. The last residential school closed in the 90s. So there are survivors today who went to residential schools, and it's just important to talk about and to know and educate yourself, because I know for a fact that I didn't know that existed a couple years ago. So, hey, new cause to think about, something to keep in mind, and also to give space to our Indigenous peers, because they might be reliving some trauma that there's relatives that they don't get to know because of the government's force of cultural genocide on their communities. That's all I have to say for this week. I will see you guys again next week. Talk to you soon. Bye.